Okay, guys, welcome back to Fathers for Fathers. We're here with actually one of our board members, but also a guy that I've gotten to know really well over the last couple of years, who has started also a fantastic ministry called Solo Parent. It's actually how I met Robert, because I was a solo parent. And Robert, welcome to Fathers for Fathers. Maybe just tell us a little bit about your career, solo parent, and then we'll dive right in and start chatting with Jeff and you and I on co-parenting and some of the struggles that men have in the world that we're living in these days in the wake of divorce.
Well, thanks. I'm super glad to be on here and super glad to be involved, because I think that the father crisis that we have in the world is I see it every day. My background is not in nonprofit ministry. My background is in the music and entertainment world, in the Christian music entertainment world. I started a label in the 90s and sold it to a company back here in Nashville, which is where I'm from, and had some tremendous success with that. And I really enjoyed it. We did some important things. But really what changed my life is I had been with Sony, the company that I had sold to, for about 13 years. And I decided that I was young enough at that time to start again. So I wanted to start another company. So I left Sony, and 3 months later, my wife left me. And we were parents to 3 girls at the time who were 9, 7, and 4. So I went from being a full-time music executive to being a full-time dad with 100% custody of my girls. And during that period of time, well, it didn't start off with full custody. There was some co-parenting for about 6 months, but that eroded fairly quickly. So I spent the next 8.5 years raising my girls on my own. And in the course of doing that, I really searched for resources to kind of help me navigate what I was going through. Like I said, I was a business guy. I was a music industry person, and I didn't know the first thing about raising kids on my own, let alone 3 girls. And so I just kind of made this commitment to myself that once I got some of my own health, that I would try to do something about the lack of resources and support that single parents have in the world. And so I started an organization in 2018 or 2017, roughly about then, called Solo Parent. And we have groups, we have a weekly podcast, we have daily devotions, and it's just been remarkable, the things that have happened. And what I have come to find is that even though my solo parent journey was so hard, it was probably the most important thing to have ever happened to me, from reframing the way I look at every facet of my life. And so I want other single parents, men and women, to find the same transformation that I found. So often we run from struggle, we run from adversity, and it turns out it's the very thing that changes our identity. And so I say lean into some of that brokenness. And so for the last few years, we've just been doing this, and it continues to grow in spite of a pandemic. And like you said, Jonathan, that's how I met you. And I just love what Fathers for Fathers is doing, and I'm so glad to be a small part.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. I know Jeff is glad to have you here. Jeff, do you have a question to kickstart us for Rob in this vein?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm definitely interested in the, what you're doing, Rob, with the solo parent support groups. I mean, first, I guess I'm curious, even how does it all work? Like, what does a typical support group look like? Like, if you're a user experiencer, is it an open meeting? Is there a screening process for participants? Is there a meeting format? Like, tell us a little bit about what it looks like. Because I mean, one thing I love about what you're doing is you're going to be a resource for people that stumble upon Fathers for Fathers, like solo parent. So I mean, it'd be great to just acquaint even me and those listening to what they can expect if they're looking for support.
So we had in-person groups for the beginning of when we first started, and the support group model, I found a group of men during my solo season that were absolutely one of the most important things that got me through. And it was really a group of men that got together. It's called Samson Society. And it had nothing to do with divorce. It had to do with men just owning their stuff and not trying to fix each other. And so when I started these support groups, my goal was really to facilitate some guidelines and some focus in the sense of, we're not here to fix each other. We're definitely a faith organization, and our faith guides everything that we do. But we're not here to try to fix other people. And so in our support groups, there's some guidelines and introductions. And then we have basically a topic discussion. So each week there is a different theme and a different topic. And it's 52 weeks a year. So we have about a 12-minute kind of engagement of reading through you would call it a lesson, but I try to avoid calling it that. And then we just get into a time of open sharing, where it's just sharing what's going on in our lives, things that we've learned. It could be related to the topic, or it could be just something else. And I have found that is actually the secret sauce. That's where men and women, and it's co-ed, really discover what God is doing in their lives, and they feel like they're not alone. And I think that's one of the things that really torments a single parent. And I will also say, I think really, and Jonathan, you and I have talked about this, I think that's one of the primary issues that men face, is they feel like they have to do it alone. And so they isolate and they have to carry the burden. And so what Solo Parent is about is really kind of breaking that and saying, you're not alone. There are other people, there are millions of other people just like you that are walking a similar path. And so if we can embrace each other, our model is really simple. We provide free resources for single parents. We build community as a second step. We bring single parents together. And then the third step is we encourage them to use their stories to reach other people. It's really, really a simple thing, but it's been profound. And there's no membership. We have an app, so you can join a group 7 days a week online now. The pandemic shut down all of our in-person groups. And so a lot of what we do right now is online. So you can download the app and find a group any day. There's no requirements. The only vetting, I guess, that we do is just that we ask that you identify yourself. And of course, we talk about confidentiality. It's a big deal to us. And because we're dealing with broken people and people that have sordid stories of hardship, we have a rule that if my ex showed up to a group, basically the first person that has been involved in that group kind of takes precedence. So that's one of the only stipulations that we have.
Sure. And that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really important.
Kind of hard to be vulnerable when you're still injured and trying to co-parent with somebody, and there's brokenness for both of you. I love that you said it's co-ed, not alone.
Yes, that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah, I love that you talked about you found a group of men for support. Can we just focus in here on the guys for a minute?
Absolutely.
There's several things you said there, like guys are isolating, and yet it feels so good to know you're not alone. I know the first time I went into one of your groups, I think I was the only guy in the group, but I still was delighted to be there because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And I mean, it definitely felt a little weird being the only guy in the room at the time, but I know there's lots of guys that go to the solo parent meetings. But like on that note, how many guys come to the solo parent meetings versus women as a ratio? And why do you think it's so hard to get the guys to not isolate? It seems like a default, and to actually find community like you did with the group of men you found.
So I think, first of all, our ratios are typically this 70 to 80% women that participate in the groups, but we have a podcast every single day, and it's actually kind of split down the middle as far as participants or listeners. And I think that the reason that, and we have, first of all, we have leaders. I don't lead all the groups. We have like 40 leaders around the country now that lead the groups.
Yep.
Men and women.
And in Canada.
Yes, this is very true. This is very true. And we have found there's a lot of healing that happens in co-ed situations where you're hearing people of the opposite sex actually struggling. And it takes some of the venom out of how we might feel about an ex. When you go, okay, not all women or not all men are the problem.
Are bad.
Yeah. So, but in relation to your, why do men, why is that ratio that way? There's a couple of reasons. One of them has to do specifically with single parents, and one has to do with just men in general. First of all, with single parents, a majority of the primary custody is with women. And so I think that there is this, I don't want to say bias, but this kind of, it's the wrong perception, but that a majority of single parents in America or in Canada are moms. And that's simply not true. Biology tells us that there have to be two sexes involved in making a child. So if there is a single mom, there is a single dad. But I think the larger issue that I think you're touching on a little bit is men in our culture tend to isolate because we are scared to show weakness. We are expected to have things together. We are expected to show up and be strong. And so it's a vulnerable spot to put yourself in and say, okay, I might need help. But it's the most transformational thing that can happen for a man. And we have talked about this extensively, that men need each other. We need authentic relationship. That's what Fathers for Fathers is really building and saying, look, you don't need to pretend. You need to come out of isolation. We've all got stuff that we're carrying. But the reason that I think participation in solo parent sways more women are first of all, just the primary custody issue. And then as culture, I think, dictates, men are just scared of stepping into that vulnerability and that weakness spot, which is actually, we're created for dependence. So
I can't help but think too, like there's a shame factor with men. Men seem to get trapped by shame. They feel like they've failed. I think we think shame, like, oh, he cheated on her or he was a porn addict, but shame has got all kinds of ugly heads for men. Like for men, the biggest shame is failure. Like you could have done nothing wrong, but you still feel like a complete failure. And so you literally withdraw in shame because you feel like you failed as a husband and as a father. And so can we chat a little bit about that, Rob? Because I know you said to me, and I'm actually looking at my social media post from when I first met you. I had met you about a month before this, but you and I had a chat, and it was June 29th, 2022, around Father's Day. And I posted, shout out to all the step parents, because I was thinking about my wife, Sarah, who's an amazing stepmom out there. Single parents that are fighting to stay in their kids' alive. Know this, I'm quoting you, Rob. It's not my brilliance. That was a social media. You aren't alone. Believe it or not, there's a divine arc to yours and your kid's story. When you said that to me, I broke down and cried because there's a hopelessness for single parents that we think, well, that's it. We failed. Our kids are now disadvantaged compared to every other kid out there and every other home. But you spoke truth into me when you said there's a divine arc, Jonathan, to this, if you trust God. And then you said something that was extremely formative. And God has continually reiterated to me, but you were the first person to tee this ball up. God is pursuing your kids more than you are or ever could.
Yeah.
And when you said that to me, Rob, it was life. And so I want to quote you and go back to that post where I shared your app. But like, let's speak to the men right now, because there's guys listening to us that maybe they're in prison. Or they've made mistakes and they're living in shame. They're drowning that shame in all kinds of ways. And we got to get these guys back to the table. We got to get them back in the narrative. Like when you were talking about even the ratios in Canada, 80% of post-marriage women have full custody. 6% of men have full custody like you, and 13.5% have joint custody like I had. So, these kids don't have an extremely critical building block for their formation in their lives a lot of the time, almost entirely to some extent. And these guys are out there and they're listening to you and I right now, and they've got this shame factor. And we gotta let them know how their Father in heaven sees them before they can be good earthly fathers.
Yeah, so true. Man, there's a lot to what you just said. I think shame does control a lot of men. And I think the narrative lie in our culture is that we're not qualified to do what God would have us do. Because we're all very acquainted with our weaknesses, whether it be porn or whether it just be pride or gluttony or whatever it is.
Yep.
And women they seem to have a more natural way of sharing each other's loads and carrying it together. And men, we don't. We feel like we have to do it alone. So the shame keeps us isolated. But one thing that's become really clear to me is that this idea, first of all, of a divine story arc. When you think about the people that God really used in the Bible, the ones that are most quoted, notable, I can't think of many examples of, I don't know if I can think of any examples of someone that came to the table in ministry fully qualified to do what they were doing. When you think about Moses, when you think about David, when you think about Paul, when you think about, all of them, they're gruff failures, murder, like betrayal, adultery, like it's just, and God used him. I mean, you think about Paul, like he killed Christians, right?
Yeah.
He is an anchor point to the entire New Testament. And so I think that we need to, and I know that's one of the messages of Fathers for Fathers, is get rid of that narrative lie that's saying that you are not qualified, A, to participate in life, B, to bring something to the world, and maybe most importantly, to be the father that you need to be for your kids.
Yeah.
Because of the stats that you just said, that 80% are full custody with mom, there's some that are split co, and some that are with dads. I unfortunately see too many stories of, sorry, my phone just dang, let me turn it off. Too many stories of men that fight for custody, they don't get full custody, and they try to stay in their kids' lives, but they just get worn down and they stop trying. And so they relegate their role, their masculine man role in their kids' lives, because they have just been beaten down. And I think my message to them is that you may not be a perfect father, but you are your child's perfect parent. God chose you to be the father of your child. It wasn't a mistake. And so in that sense, there is no one better qualified at being a male role model in your child's life. There is nobody more qualified than you. And that's not because you have a degree. And it's not because you got everything right. It's not because of anything. It's because that's the way it was designed. And to the point of this arc, the divine arc, is we all go through things that take us in and out of either perceived or real success and real failure. But the truth is that if we believe in the God of the Bible, we see that he not only redeems the story, and I talk about this on my podcast all the time, God uses everything. There is hope. There's not just hope that you're going to get through this season. There's hope that you are going to be better because of the season. And so often we distance ourselves from those things that we are ashamed of. And the truth is those things are actually refining us to be who we're supposed to be. Does that make sense?
It sure does, man. Yeah. Honestly, I even needed to hear that, Rob. So thank you. I think about the old saying, God doesn't qualify. He qualifies the called. He doesn't call the qualified. And if you had said to me, oh yeah, no, Jonathan, you're going to start a ministry called Fathers for Fathers in 20 years ago, I would have been like, no, like that's not even anything that I'm interested in. Yeah. And now, we were just interviewing Randall Wallace prior to you, and at the very end of the interview, he said, what you're most passionate about, what you'd be willing to die for, like that's your life's calling. And it was so funny because he said that, and I was like, wow, I know what I'm the most passionate about, and it's men, broken men. Like I actually know that I would die to see broken men be whole. Yeah. It doesn't mean I don't love my wife and my kids or love the Lord, but like I got to a place where I was such a broken man and God healed me. And if he hadn't have healed me, I would not be so passionate about letting other men know that he can heal you too.
Right. And what I love about what you said, Jonathan, is that I know you pretty well and you know me pretty well. And what I love about your heart is that a lot of times, especially in Christendom, in evangelical circles, we feel like, okay, now we've got to have it all right. But if you lead with the softness of your brokenness, then you will attract other people into the fold. And so what I love about what you're doing, Father for Fathers, is yes, it is worth dying for. Solo parent is worth dying for. Exactly. Because I have been transformed because of this very thing. And so when you have tasted, it's the story of the Bible, the Gospels, that like it's all testimony. It's not just hearsay. It's testimony. When you have seen, tasted, no one can take that away. That's why thousands of people gave their lives not denouncing Jesus, because they were eyewitnesses. It was their testimony.
We've seen it. We can't deny what we've seen.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also gives you an empathy to walk with other men and go, okay, no, you might actually be screwing up, but I'm still going to walk with you, because this is not about fixing you or getting you right. This is about loving you into brotherhood that transforms us into the men that we're supposed to be. Because let's face it, in our society, like, with all the confusion over gender, quote unquote, like, it's a quagmire out there. What is a man? Like, what is, it's hard to answer that. I'm scared to answer what is a man sometimes, because I don't want to come off offensive. And so if that is kind of a norm of our society now, then of course we have a problem with kind of understanding who we are. And so that's why what you're doing, I think, is so beautiful. What we get a chance to do with Fathers for Fathers is just like, it's so needed. It's so needed.
I think it's so important to challenge men to be vulnerable and to, to speak about their shame, their guilt. Like, because I think those two factors alone, that shame factor, can keep men from getting help.
Hostage.
Yeah.
It'll hold you hostage.
Yeah, it keeps you in your corner. Like, I mean,
and God gives you permission, men, to be free of that. You don't have to be a hostage to your shame.
Yeah.
Right. He promises that he'll give you restoration. Right.
Do you find yourself even in those in the solo parent, some of the solo parent groups, do they talk about shame a lot? Is that one of the topics that comes up?
It's often, so much. Shame is one of the biggest topics that emerges. So again, like in our support groups, we set the theme and the topic for the week, but when we get to open share, you can either talk about the topic or you can talk about whatever's going on. And I would say 100% of every single group that happens, someone brings up some kind of shame factor, whether it's shame for things that they've done in the past or shame for not being the perfect parent right now. Like, shame is like, it's a cancer, man. And it's for men and women, but I think, like we've talked about, for men especially, we just, it's a struggle for me. I feel like I'm getting healthier. I don't feel like I'm completely healthy, but I struggle with shame a lot. And so we don't want to be vulnerable and be known by other people. But if you're not known by other people, if you're not like willing to expose the thing that you feel shameful for, you can't be delivered from it, because you can't. If you keep things in the dark, the only thing that brings things out of and allows healing is light. If you keep it in the dark, it just festers. It turns into other lies. And that compounds. And so that's what like solo parent and these kind of community things help with.
It's remarkable, the upward spiral, the downward spiral you can go to. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just speaking about vulnerability, because I think there's, when you talk about their open groups, do you find it's, are people guarded? Sometimes it's like, we talk about vulnerability, you can't be vulnerable with everyone, or can we? Like, that's a good question, right? Like, should we be?
You have to know that it's safe.
Talk to?
Yeah, it's got to be safe.
We train our leaders pretty explicitly on how to try to create a safe environment. It's not a perfect system, but we always, in our groups, we say,
I think he froze.
Oh, shoot, we lost Rob.
Just to make an introduction, that you can keep it the rest of the meeting. And some of the most beautiful, like, bring me to tears moments is like, I have been in meetings where I have led a group for a year, and there's been someone on the other line that barely recognize or barely says their name, won't say exactly where they're from, but they show up week after week after week. And then one day, I'm thinking of two people that I know off the top of my head, like 9 months, maybe a year into coming to these meetings anonymously, I see them turn off their mute button. And she says, hey, I don't usually speak, and I like go, oh my gosh, she's coming into like sharing. Place. And then a few months later, she actually turns her camera on, and then we do this conference, and she shows up to the conference, and it's like now one of them is a leader. And it's just, they go from this, when you are known and it's a safe place, it's incredible the empowerment that happens. But again, bringing what is typically in the dark into the light, not trying to fix it, but allowing God to transform us.
Mhm.
In
Okay,
the
we need to
community.
wrap up because our next guest is in the waiting room. But what I want to say, Rob, is and to our guys listening is like Fathers for Fathers is about being a flag bearer for men. What Rob is doing is a place where you can actually go and get help. And these are the ministries we're partnering with. So if you're so inclined and you want to check out Solo Parent and drop into one of these chats and these sessions, like I can tell you, having done them myself, they are amazing. And it is a safe place. I felt very safe, even when sometimes it was me and one other guy and 8 women. I was like, no, I can tell that these ladies have a real heart for God and a heart for their children and a heart to, figure out how to move forward in the wake of divorce. And, like one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people in the wake of a divorce, there's like PTSD and they're like, how do I co-parent with somebody that literally triggers me? Well, this is the kind of
Yeah.
stuff that Rob
Big
spends
one right
time
there.
on, guys. So like get in these rooms. We're obviously starting our 1-800 number. So that's so you can talk, guys being guys. We've thought, okay,
Yeah.
no, we need something where it's one guy on one guy and the guy can just pour his heart out. But obviously we know that that's a Band-Aid on the bullet wound. But the goal is to pull you guys out of this place of isolation and get you into organizations where you can get the support and help you need. So I want to thank you, Rob,
Yeah.
on behalf of Jeff and I for joining us today.
Thank you.
And obviously so glad that you're on our board, and I can't wait to collaborate because these two ministries obviously really have some harmony that we wouldn't necessarily have with other ministries. So glad to
Yeah.
be
Well, thank you. It's an honor. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. God bless.
Hold me, I'm sinking, Father, this world is just too much on my